FuneReality, third act. Roland went out into the rain, taking the right-hand path around the funeral home back to the parking lot. It was still raining, and it had gotten even colder as the wind had picked up. He buried his hands in the pockets of his coat, held his head down, but it did not really help against the rain. Water ran down from his hair, ran down the back of his neck, water pooled in his shoes, water soaked through the fabric of his trousers. Water ran down his cheeks, but it was only the rain. Only the rain. He did not feel anything. The eulogy had made him feel even less than he had before, somehow. The hole inside him had expanded, grown, become something alive and volatile. He could feel it pulsing inside him, carrying the beat of his heart, informing the beat of his feet on the gravel, the crunching sound lost behind the endless drone of the rain. It pulsed and raged in his ears, in his temples, mixing with the rain and the wind, with the music faintly carried over through the windows of the funeral home. But Roland did not see anything, did not hear anything. He moved through the darkness he had fallen into, as if pulled along on a string, as if a tendril had coiled around his body and was dragging him along, as if he was a puppet, with someone else controlling his strings, moving him to and fro. Seen from outside, he looked to move with a purpose as he strode down the path, making a beeline for his car. Thorwald went out into the rain, taking the left-hand path around the funeral home back to the parking lot. It was still raining, and it had gotten even colder as the wind had picked up. He wished he had thought to bring his raincoat, but that was still in the funeral home, so his t-shirt and his pants were already beginning to get wet. This was not how he had imagined it to go at all. He had actually enjoyed the idea of coming back in through the rain, hair standing wildly in all directions, water running off of the gun as he fired the first volley into the unsuspecting crowd, but now he looked like a miserable dog that had been forgotten outside an abandoned shopping mall. The eulogy had made him feel even less than he had before somehow. The hole inside him had expanded, grown, become something alive and volatile. He could feel it pulsing inside him, carrying the beat of his heart, informing the beat of his feet on the gravel, the crunching sound lost behind the endless drone of the rain. It pulsed and raged in his ears, in his temples, mixing with the rain and the wind, with the music faintly carried over through the windows of the funeral home. But Thorwald did not see anything, did not hear anything. He moved through the darkness that had claimed him as if on a conveyor belt, as if a hook had been shot through his stomach and was reeling him in, as if he was a puppet with someone else controlling his strings, moving to and fro. Seen from outside, he looked to move with a purpose as he strode down the path, making a beeline for his car. Thorwald and Roland, each following the trail that extended outward from his inner darkness to the source of whatever it was that had joined them in the FuneReality, came upon the parking lot to the place where they had parked their cars, right next to each other. Both had their keys out, pressed the buttons to unlock their cars, the lights blinking in unison, the yellow looking sickly and out of place in the darkening rain. They stood for a moment looking at each other, awkward and lost for words, as the rain continued to fall on their heads, soaking them through to their bones. Their eyes met, and they saw each other's flame burning inside. They both realized that only they were real, that everything else was empty, meaningless, scripted, automatic. It could have been a moment of bonding, of mending bridges and closing gaps. It felt as if the world itself held its breath, waiting for the extended hand that would be pulled into a hug. Instead, the brothers launched into another of their useless arguments, full of petty insults and pent-up rage. Heedless of the rainfall, which grew in force with every passing second, they did not care that they had to shout to be heard over the rush of falling water and the clatter of raindrops on the roofs of their cars. "I hope you're happy with how you handled yourself in there. I hope you are ashamed by your conduct. You made a mess of the eulogy and now I should feel ashamed? You failed Mother one last time, and now you don't want to feel ashamed. Coming here was a mistake. You are a mistake. Oh, please, you look like you woke up passed out in a recycling bank. Right, because I'm the one with the drinking problem. If I drink, at least I do it in the company of friends. As if you have any friends. I know you are used to being sad and alone all the time, but some of us actually leave the house once in a while. Yeah, because your wife can't stand the sight of you, so she makes you leave. At least my wife did not leave me, because I disgust her so much, she goes to the bathroom to vomit every time I touch her. At least my children don't pretend they're orphans, because they're so embarrassed by me. Yeah, your children just tried to kill themselves because they abhor being yours so much. You are the reason Dad got prostate cancer and died slowly. I hope you get colonoscopies without anesthesia twice yearly and still get prostate cancer and die slowly. Are you sure you should be driving a car in your state? What state is that? A state of emergency! That doesn't even make any sense. Funny, that is what I thought when I saw you getting married to your wife. I assume it's also what Mom thought when she saw that you were her son too. Mentioning their mother had been the touch too much, the step too far, and suddenly there were punches and kicks, a headlock, an attempted tackle, more grappling, and then they both landed on the wet concrete of the parking lot, rolling around like wild rabid dogs, biting and clawing and spitting and scratching, and finally coming to a rest, one next to the other on their backs, panting and grunting. Their clothes were tattered and torn. They were full of blood and dirt, their faces bruised and gashed, more blood pooling around them, forming puddles with the endless rain. They just lay there for a while, neither of them moving. Despite the clamor made by the rain, it felt silent, peaceful even. They were both so wet at this point that it was basically impossible for the continuing rainfall to soak them any further, so they just lay there, looking up at the ash-gray sky and the clouds that were turning darker, becoming almost entirely black. A black so deep it was not just the absence of light, but the opposite of it. The great twilight itself seemed to disappear into the cloud-shaped holes, which began to blur and wash into one another like an expressionist painting, becoming one massive dark cloud that threatened to blot out the sky. And both of them knew that it was the hole inside them, around them, the hole in the shape of their mother that was given its unlife by them. It was absolutely inimical to life, to theirs and that of those around them, those that had moved on with the world and left them behind here in this uncanny world dominated by the blackness and the rain of the void, which served not to extinguish, but to fuel the black flame that would soon rise to consume reality itself. If they had been able to communicate, they might have found that their experiences ever since the death of their mother had been eerily similar, that whatever had gotten hold of one of them had, in fact, gotten hold of both of them. But what burned inside them now, what fueled them, was not one to forgive and forget, to embrace and connect. It was by its very being isolated and alone, feeling nothing but hate and a deep-seated, unquenchable hunger. The brothers had brought it with them to the funeral, and during their eulogy, it had been able to extend itself, to spread its writhing mass around and latch onto the crowd. In the atmosphere of boredom and melancholy, no one noticed the gathering tendrils of shadows that began to seep in from the edges of the room and through the open window, gathering above all their heads, growing ever bigger, like a giant octopoid ship made out of thick dark smoke. And as they all stood up to leave the room and go towards the parking lot to drive to the restaurant that had been prepared for the wake, the octopoid followed them, picking up ever more darkness with every step of the way. It had no eyes and no maw, and yet it saw, and yet it hungered. As the crowd made its slow way outside and was greeted by the pouring rain, Falling from an ever-darkening sky, the small octopoid seemed to extend upwards, first in small droplets, then in a solid sheet, like it was reversing the raindrops, meeting the dark void that had formed over the parking lot, and was slowly extending in all directions. At the core of the undulating, formless shape, which at seemingly random intervals turned into shapeless forms, was a whirling vortex of nothing, the mirror and conclusion of the nothing that the brothers had felt ever since their mother had died. Thorwald could feel the approach of the crowd, making its slow way towards the parking lot, and he realized that this was to be the end. He got up, slowly, painfully, and limped over to his car. His leg felt like it was broken, but that did not matter at all. He opened his trunk and took out the shotgun, and he could hear it greet him. A flash of lightning from overhead illuminated the scene, but he did not notice it, caressing the gun like one would a long-lost lover or the face of a dead relative. He also got out the knives and put them into his belt for later. He turned around, gun held at the ready, but his brother had disappeared. Well, no matter, he thought. After all, the useless son of a bitch was too real anyway. His brother and him had went through the motions, as they always did when they met, turning each other into machines that only knew how to lash out and hurt. But at the same time, only his brother was able to do so, was able to make him feel anything through his actions, unlike all the machines that were now being born towards him by their programming to be decommissioned, as their programming had run its course. Thorwald crouched low, hidden by the darkness and the rain, held his breath, and waited for the end. Roland also felt the approach of the crowd, and he knew he did not want to be around when they would arrive. He was not quite sure where he wanted to be, but the phrase "anywhere but here" suddenly rang very true. He was pretty certain that his jaw was broken, but he could still drive, so he entered his car and, without sparing his brother, that useless son of a bitch, another glance, drove away through the rain and the darkness, followed by the void which would never leave him as long as his mother was dead and he was alone. Whatever script he might have had, it had run out. There was nothing left but blank page after blank page. And he could not stand this. He refused to stand this any longer, and suddenly he knew where he had to go. Roland accelerated the car, speeding through the darkness and the rain, holding his breath and waiting for the end.